Coming in at number 5, SHGB02 plus 14A. Yeah, that's a mouthful. This is an astronomical radio source and is a candidate in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence discovered in March 2003 by SETI at home. Now, the source was observed 3 times for a total of about a minute at a frequency of about 1420 MHz, one of the frequencies in the Waterhole region, which is theorized to be a good candidate for frequencies used by extraterrestrial life to broadcast contact signals. Now, the region it hailed from is usually devoid of any nearby stars. The closest star systems in approximate region of the signal include the binary star G7311A and B, which are 106.1 light years from the Sun. Although the unrelated star G7310 is only 108.7 light years away, less than 3 light years from G7311A and B, all of these stars are red dwarfs, which is the smallest and coolest kind of star on the main sequence and are by far the most common type in the Milky Way. Now, there are a number of puzzling features of this candidate which have led to a large amount of skepticism. The source itself is located between the constellations Pisces and Aries, a direction in which no stars are observed within 1000 light years from Earth. It is also a very weak signal. The frequency of the signal has a rapid drift, changing between 8 and 37 Hz per second. Now, here's where things get interesting. If the cause is Doppler shift, it would indicate emissions from a planet rotating nearly 40 times faster on its axis than the Earth. Each time the signal was detected, it was again at about 1420 MHz, the original frequency before any drift. Of course, there are many explanations for the signal, but many are purporting an artifact of random chance, cosmic noise, or even a glitch. I'm here for aliens though. I always am. Coming in at 4, FRBs. One of the biggest mysteries out there in the universe is, of course, is there something other than just us, or are we alone in the universe? That's the question. Well, as of August 14, 2019, we have inched closer to an answer. An astonishing 8 new repeating audio radio signals known as fast radio bursts, aka FRBs, have been detected flaring from deep space. Very creepy indeed. At the beginning of 2019, just one of these signals was reported to flash repeatedly. However, in January, scientists reported a second repeating one. This means we're beginning to build a statistical database of repeaters, which would help astronomers figure out what these signals actually mean. These FRBs are perplexing and are detected as spikes in radio data lasting just a few milliseconds, but in that time they can discharge more energy than 500 million suns. I quote, "Just as some volcanoes are more active than others, and you can think a volcano as dormant because it has not erupted in a long time, this can be said about FRBs. There is also a frequency drift. The first 2 repeaters showed a downward drift in frequency, with each burst getting successfully lower, kind of like a sad trombone sound effect. As of right now, scientists are attempting to figure out where the FRBs are hailing from and what exactly the signals mean. Perhaps it is from extraterrestrial life, telling us they're out there, or perhaps it's something far more sinister." Coming in at number 3, Tabby's Star. Also known as KIC 8462852, Voyager Star or WTF Star is an F-type main sequence star located in the constellation Cygnus, approximately 1470 light years from Earth. Unusual light fluctuations of the star, including up to a 22% dimming in brightness, were discovered by citizen scientists as part of the Planet Hunters project. In September 2015, astronomers and citizen scientists associated with the project posted a preprint of an article describing the data and possible interpretations. The discovery was made from data collected by the Kepler Space Telescope, which observed changes in the brightness of distant stars to detect exoplanets. Now, Tabby Star is not the only star that has large irregular dimmings, but all other such stars are young stellar objects called YSO dippers, which have different dimming patterns. Now, several hypotheses have been proposed to explain the star's irregular changes in brightness, as measured by its light curve, but none to date fully explain all aspects of the curve. One explanation is that an uneven ring of dust orbits Tabby's star. Another explanation is that the star's luminosity is modulated by changes in the efficiency of heat transport to its photosphere. One external obscuration is required. Now, a third hypothesis, based on a lack of observed infrared light, posits a swarm of cold, dusty comet fragments in a highly eccentric orbit. However, the notion that disturbed comets from such a cloud could exist in high enough numbers to obscure 22% of the star's observed luminosity has been doubted. It has also been hypothesized that the changes in brightness could be signs of activity associated with intelligent extraterrestrial life constructing a Dyson swarm. However, further analysis based on data through the end of 2017 showed wavelength-dependent dimming consistent with dust, not an opaque object such as an alien megastructure. Again, I'm still going with aliens. It's always aliens. Coming in at number 2, WOW signal. The WOW signal was a strong narrowband radio signal received on August 15, 1977 by Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope in the United States and used to support the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The signal appeared to come from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius and bore the expected hallmarks of extraterrestrial origin. It was Jerry R. Amon, an astronomer, who discovered the anomaly a few days later while reviewing the recorded data. He was so impressed by the result that he circled the reading on the computer printout and wrote the comment "wow" on its side, leading to the event's widely used name. The signal itself lasted for the full 72-second window, during which Big Ear was able to observe it, but has not been detected since, despite several subsequent attempts by Amon and others. Many people have made assumptions about the source of the sound, including natural and human-made sources, but none of them adequately explains the signal. To this day, the WOW signal remains the strongest candidate for an alien radio transmission ever detected. And finally coming in at number 1, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers. The Giudica Cordiglia brothers are two Italian former amateur radio operators who made audio recordings that allegedly support the conspiracy theory that the Soviet space program covered up cosmonaut deaths in the 1960s. The brothers claim to have acquired recordings of several secret Soviet space missions that ended in tragedy and mystery. This has of course generated public interest for more than 50 years, despite there being a large number of detailed rebuttals to the brothers' claims. In the 60s, the brothers claim to have heard radio communications taken from the secret space missions, including the dying sounds of a suffocating lost cosmonaut. One of their most famous recordings was made on November 28, 1960. After about an hour of listening to static, the brothers recognized an SOS signal that seemed to be moving away from the Earth. In 1963, the brothers claimed they recorded the voice of a female cosmonaut entering the Earth's atmosphere in a malfunctioning spacecraft. In the recording, she is heard to have cried out, "I'm hot," as it burnt up. In total, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers released 9 recordings over a period of 4 years. The details were as follows. May 1960, a crewed spacecraft reports it is going off course. November 28, 1960, a faint SOS Morse code signal is sent from another troubled spacecraft leaving Earth's orbit. February 1961, a cosmonaut is audibly recorded suffocating to death. April 1961, a capsule is recorded orbiting the Earth 3 times before re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, days before Yuri Gagarin made his historic flight. May 1961, an orbiting spacecraft makes an appeal for help after going out of control. October 61, a cosmonaut loses control of his spacecraft, which veers off into deep space. November 1962, a space capsule misjudges re-entry, bouncing off the Earth's atmosphere and out into space. November 1963, a female cosmonaut dies during re-entry. April 1964, another cosmonaut is killed when his capsule burns up in the Earth's atmosphere. Since the 60s, critical analysis of the recordings has cast doubt on their provenance. For instance, audio transcripts reveal that none of the cosmonauts were supposed to be Soviet Air Force pilots, followed standard communication protocols such as identifying themselves when speaking or using correct technical terminology. Fishy fishy. Still, I have doubts. I think something greater is going on here. In at number 5, we have the Soyuz 11. On June 6, the cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev were launched into space aboard Soyuz 11 on a mission to dock and enter Salyut-1, the Soviet space station that had been placed in orbit in April. The mission's goal was to set a record for the longest time spent in space. The spacecraft successfully docked with the station, and the cosmonauts spent 23 days orbiting the Earth. On June 30th, they left Salyut-1 and began re-entry procedures. When they fired the explosive bolts to separate the Soyuz 11 re-entry capsule from another stage of the spacecraft, a critical valve was jerked open. 100 miles above the Earth, the capsule was suddenly exposed to the nearly pressureless environment of space. As the capsule rapidly depressurized, Patsayev tried to close the valve by hand but failed. Minutes later, the cosmonauts were dead. They became the first people to ever die in space. The last message that they sent to Earth was them trying to scream for help, but they couldn't due to the loss of pressure. All they heard from the crew was them gasping for air and then popping sounds from the air in their lungs expanding. The spacecraft landed itself perfectly on Earth, fully intact. When it was opened, they found the remains of the crew, with blood dripping from their ears and nose, and their skin had turned blue due to the lack of oxygen. Not many today have heard the recording, but it is sure to send chills down anyone's spine hearing these poor men last few minutes in space. In at number 4 we have WOW. In 1977, the sound of extraterrestrials were heard by human ears for the very first time. The WOW signal was detected by astronomer Jerry Eman using Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope. It is a radio signal detector that was pointed at a group of stars called Chi Sagittarii in the constellation Sagittarius. When scanning the skies around the stars, Eman captured a 72-second burst of radio waves. He circled the reading and wrote "Wow" next to it, hence the signal's name. He was desperately searching for the signal to get a second reading, but he never found it again. Over the last 40 years, the signal has been cited as evidence that we are not alone in the galaxy. Experts and laypeople alike believe that finally we had evidence of alien life. The WOW signal is the strongest signal we have ever received from space. We may never know who or what caused the signal, but it is the strongest proof Earth has ever had that there is something else out there. Hopefully, whatever it is, it's peaceful or like Earth. In at number 3 we have Lost Cosmonaut. The Lost Cosmonauts are subject of a theory alleging that some Soviet cosmonauts went to outer space, but their existence has never been publicly acknowledged by either the Soviet or Russian space authorities. The Soviet Union attempted to launch human spaceflights before Yuri Gagarin's first spaceflight, and those cosmonauts on board died in those attempts. Two brothers who were former amateur radio operators made audio recordings which support the theory that the Soviet space program covered up cosmonaut deaths in the 1960s. One of the recordings in question is from November 1963. The recording is of a woman who died on a solo mission into space. In the recording you can hear her screaming. She is shouting about how the capsule is heating up. You can hear her screaming it is getting hot. She is frantically looking for someone to help her, but once she was up there she was on her own. It is believed the capsule burned up on re-entry and the woman died. When asked about the recording, the Soviets claimed that the space mission was unmanned and no woman died during re-entry. The evidence seems to prove this wrong, and their denial proves the possibility of the cover-up. In at number 2, sounds of Saturn. The ringed planet and its moon Enceladus have a lot to say to each other. Though it's been gone for nearly a year, the Cassini spacecraft continues to fuel new studies of Saturn and its many moons. In particular, Cassini's unique and close-up view of the system during its grand finale orbits produced data that have revealed how plasma waves moving outward from the planet interact with both its rings and its moons. Now, in a video produced by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory using this data, you can tune into the sounds of Saturn, the radio emission generated by these plasma waves as they travel along the invisible magnetic field lines linking the planet with its icy moon Enceladus. As it plunged closer to the planet during its grand finale on September 2, 2017, Cassini's radio and plasma wave science instrument picked up electromagnetic waves as it traveled through the Enceladus flux tube, a sort of conduit between the moon and the planet, bounded by magnetic field lines and through which charged particles can flow back and forth. The waves fall in the range of human hearing, and scientists have now amplified them into the audio file below, compressing about 16 minutes worth of data down to 28.5 seconds of scary space sounds. Finally, in at number 1 we have Milky Way signal. A fast radio burst was detected from within our galaxy for the very first time. We may be closer to uncovering its origin. On April 28, 2020, 2 ground-based radio telescopes detected an intense pulse of radio waves. It only lasted a mere millisecond, but for astonished astronomers it was a major discovery, representing the first time a fast radio burst, or FRB, had ever been detected so close to Earth. Located just 30,000 light-years from our planet, the event was firmly within the Milky Way, and it was, to all intents and purposes, almost impossible to miss. The Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment certainly had no problems picking it up. I quote, "We weren't even looking in the right direction and we still saw it loud and clear in our peripheral vision," one of them noted. One of the major problems with detecting FRBs, aside from most of them having been so far away, is that they are so fleeting. They've been and gone in the blink of an eye despite being 100 million times more powerful than the sun. They can release as much energy in a few thousandths of a second as the sun in 100 years. Ideally, astronomers would discover an object and focus one or more different telescopes at it, but the ephemeral nature of these bursts removes any such opportunity. But despite these challenges, astronomers have succeeded in building up a bank of knowledge about FRBs, most of which has been based on the dozens of recorded events from beyond our own galaxy. For starters, we know they are bright flashes of radio light lasting from microseconds to milliseconds. All sky searches for them also suggest that thousands of these bursts occur in the sky every single day. It'll take many years of research to understand exactly what these signals mean. Until then, we can just wonder about what is out there among the galaxy.
Number 5. Weird signal from the Milky Way. Astronomers have been studying fast radio bursts, or FRBs, that's a little acronym there to make me sound smart, for decades outside of our galaxy in the hopes of someday making some contact with our extraterrestrial friends and saying hello. Well, decades of research might have paid off when on April 28th, 2020, 2 ground-based radio telescopes discovered an intense pulse of radio waves within the Milky Way. This event was the first time an FRB had ever been detected within the galaxy, and somehow, despite this burst only lasting for a millisecond, it was apparently almost impossible to miss. I know what all of these words mean for sure. The burst was 30,000 light years away from Earth, so, about a stone's throw up that way, really just a block away on the cosmic scale. It was first discovered by the CHIME, a fancy acronym for the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment, as well as another project, the STARE, the Survey for Transient Astronomical Radio Emission. I just woke up, man, and I don't really know what these acronyms mean either, but I'm having a lot of fun saying them for you, and I hope you enjoy that. This discovery was notable as well for being the most energetic radio blast these astronomers have ever seen, but it was also one of the closest. Usually when we're talking about radio frequencies all the way up in space, these things are like billions of years of light years away, which does not make them particularly easy to study. You're getting a real far away glance. But if there's one on our doorstep, way easier to focus on. So what is this weird signal coming out of the Milky Way? Is this aliens trying to send a text and the reception's a bit foggy? Here's the trouble. Astronomers don't know for sure just yet. 3 years later, we are still not 100%. There is a small possibility, a disappointing one, that this signal could be man-made somehow and it's broadcasting all the way out here. But if not, this could very well be a promising sign of life from across the galaxy. And if you're looking for more alien content, we have got more UFO sightings than probably any other YouTube channel on this site, and I'm pretty sure of that. But if space stuff ain't your jam, we got cryptids, monsters, mythologies, true crime, fake crime, stories too good to be true and too true to be good. So click through, stay subscribed, stay screaming, and stay watching this video, okay? All the way to the end. I got a little surprise for you, I promise. Alright, moving on. Number 4, the sounds of Ganymede. Have you ever heard a planet talk? I don't mean like going for a hike and communing with trees and talking to nature or anything like that, man, okay? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like literally hearing the sounds a planet produces. Now you're gonna have to bear with me because I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I am not a rocket scientist. I'm barely even a YouTube host. But as I understand, when Juno, a NASA satellite, was orbiting Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons, NASA discovered that Ganymede had its own magnetosphere. Ganymede was radiating this strange plasma wave of energy that, when is recorded and played back, sounds absolutely terrifying. This really tickles the H.P. Lovecraft fan in my heart to be able to hear the sounds a planet is making out in the cosmos. So we're gonna play it for you now. Just take a listen to the audio of this and try to ever sleep again. I dare you. I found that pretty scary personally. I don't know, reminds me of my insignificance in the galaxy, but more than a few people on YouTube pointed out, if you just close your eyes and imagine that that's R2-D2 making all of those noises, it's not particularly scary at all, and I'm probably never gonna be able to unhear that. So is this proof of alien life hiding out inside of Jupiter's moon? Well, not quite. This is a natural phenomenon. It's definitely mysterious though, and it makes you think about the size of the cosmos and how small we are on a galactic scale, but other than that, this thing coming from Ganymede is explainable, if not a little bit confusing. I just wanted to toss it like smack dab in the middle of this list about alien speculation to keep things a little fun, fresh, and flirty for everybody. Number 3, the USS Jellyfish. That's a fun name, isn't it? That's kind of fun. The USS Jellyfish kind of calls to mind like a big ship, maybe like a cruise ship taking an all-included trip through the Bahamas. Well, not to burst your dreams of an island getaway, but the actual USS Jellyfish is a celestial object that astronomers have found that has had them asking questions that are really stinging. That was forced. That was really forced. That was not natural at all. I'm sorry. The USS Jellyfish is a giant mass of plasma that has taken the shape of a jellyfish. At least that's the best way we can see it. It's kind of like an ink blot test. You see what you want to see. It's some 300 million light years away and is a fancy radio signal called a polyphoenix, which is a term scientists use for a radio frequency up in space that they don't really have all the answers about. The giant blob in particular is so unusual that when astronomers initially discovered it, they were writing it off completely, assuming it was an accident or an error in their data. The researcher who first discovered it, one Torrance Hodgson, captured the subject in 2017 using the Murchison Wide Array, an incredibly powerful Australian ground telescope. And when he wrote on the subject, he told his colleagues, ignore the obvious bug in this data. And it was only when they were really pushing that they began to notice there was something more to it than these formal studies earlier suggested. Now, I'm gonna be honest. The full-scale implications of the space jellyfish are a little bit above my pay grade. I can kind of just look at it and be like, well, that's kind of weird. I can read to you the scientists', theories for what they think created the jellyfish, but just know I only kind of half know what I'm talking about here. Scientists believe that the jellyfish was formed over the course of 2 billion years, structured smack dab in the middle between two galaxies that have been spewing out enormous amounts of light and plasma due to intense interactions between black holes and any materials that end up falling around them, eventually creating one gigantic cosmic jellyfish floating around in the astral planes. Number 2, something unusual. Recently, a team of astronomers discovered something unusual while they were mapping out the universe, which is my favorite start to a point I have ever read on this channel. You guys know when you're mapping out the universe, then you accidentally see something unusual? Ugh, I absolutely hate when that happens. Anyway, this mysterious unusual object floats about 4,000 light years away, very close by. You can practically wave and see it. And it's pulsing strange bursts of energy out of it roughly every 20 minutes on the dot. You can set your watch to this. Somebody up in space forget to turn the oven timer off? Natasha Hurley Walker is an astrophysicist from the Curtin University in Australia, same university that discovered that jellyfish coincidentally, and was the leading researcher on this study. She said in a public statement that this object was appearing and disappearing over a few hours during our observations, and said that it was completely unexpected. It was kind of spooky for an astronomer because there's nothing known in the sky that does that. Let me take over for a second right here and tell you right now, on Top 5 Scary, if you can't tell what something weird is in the sky, it's an alien. Okay? You got an alien on your hands. So we have to assume that's what's going on here. Alongside this bizarre cosmic alarm clock, the team discovered a fossil plasma source, something that was created by powerful blasts of a bygone black hole that has since faded into the darkness. And I loved saying that. A black hole that has faded into the darkness? That's poetic. Does that not sound like where the heart of like cosmic evil in the universe would be? Does that not sound a little bit like it's something out of a Lovecraft or Stephen King book? A fossilized plasma created by the blast of a black hole that has faded into the darkness? That sounds like something a guy in a black robe would read out as part of a prophecy for the end of the universe. And number 1, Proxima Centauri. If there was ever going to be concrete signs of alien life, I think it would definitely come from a place called Proxima Centauri. Listen to that. That already sounds like it's from like a great Deep Space Nine episode. Recently, astronomers exploring for signs of life beyond Earth discovered a currently unexplained radio signal that was broadcasting from Proxima Centauri, a small red star roughly 4.2 million light years away. That's like right next door, man. If this wasn't exciting enough for you, there's radio signals coming from a strange star that no one can explain seemingly. And surrounding these stars is a planet that NASA believes has a temperate and rocky surface just like our beautiful Earth, leading to some wild speculation all around. The project is dubbed Breakthrough Listen, very cool code name, and it was a decade-long search for alien broadcasts from the nearest million stars, just in case anybody's been trying to reach us about our planet's extended warranty. This radio signal in question has been formally dubbed BLC-1 when referred to scientifically. Now this signal was first discovered in May 2019. It It's not quite the be-all and end-all proof of aliens just yet, as much as I want it to be. Sophia Sheik, the team member leading Breakthrough Listen, says she suspects that the broadcast could end up being human in origin somehow, theorizing that it could be something as simple as like a plane traveling overhead their equipment or faulty electronics somewhere getting wires tangled. Would that not be beyond embarrassing if you're a group of scientists, astronomers, and you think you've found proof of alien life, but all it is somebody forgot to take their phone off airplane mode and they've just been getting notifications for Candy Crush and it's messing with your equipment? Still, it's something to research, and it's still one of the most exciting things to happen in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence in a long time. And I hope we keep looking for extraterrestrial intelligence out there, because there sure ain't anybody down here. I messed up that joke.
And number 5, Jupiter's magnetosphere. NASA's spacecraft Juno picked up some of Jupiter's noises as it entered the planet's magnetic field. Now, according to NASA, the magnetosphere is where the movement of particles in space is controlled by what's going on inside of the planet. Juno's principal investigator Scott Bolton said of the event back in June of 2016, I quote, "We've just crossed the boundary into Jupiter's home turf. We're closing in fast on the planet itself and already gaining valuable data." Now, this recording captured the encounter with the bow shock over the course of 2 hours, and it's pretty mysterious and eerie sounding. Moving on to number 4, plasma waves. As NASA aptly stated, space is not empty, nor is it silent. Nobody can hear you scream in space. Space contains a whole lot of energetic charged particles, which behave a lot differently than what we have on Earth. In magnetic fields, including the ones that surround Earth, there are particles that are constantly tossed around by the motion of electromagnetic waves that are known as plasma waves. And the ones that exist in space make some really interesting noises. Give it a listen. Some sound like roaring waves, while others sound a little bit like whistling. I think the whistling might even be a little bit creepier. Moving on to number 3, comet encounter. In February of 2011, NASA's Stardust spacecraft flew by a comet called Tempel 1 and pelted a bunch of small rocks and dust particles at it. This is what it sounds like. Now, the full audio track is only a fraction of what NASA says was an approximate 5,000 total impacts on the spacecraft over the course of around 11 minutes. Would not want to be that spacecraft. Scientists believe that the flying debris was formed by fragmenting balls of ice and dust. And what's even cooler, this actually helped inform a theory that icy dust balls that leave a comet continually break up in space. Imagine breaking up with your comet only to slam right into a spacecraft. Rough life. And at number 2, Ganymede. Back in 1996, on June 27th, NASA's Galileo spacecraft made its first flyby of Ganymede, which is Jupiter's largest moon. Now, the sound that you're about to hear are the translated radio signals that represent data from Galileo's plasma wave experiment instrument. Pretty freaky, eh? Galileo's encounter with Ganymede was pretty monumental in the way that we look at our solar system, and it discovered many things about Jupiter and its moons, including that Jupiter has an intense radiation belt above its cloud tops, helium in roughly the same concentration as the Sun, and a lot of extensive and rapid resurfacing of the moon load due to volcanism and Ganymede's magnetic field. Neat stuff. And finally, in our number 1 spot, Saturn's radio emissions. This one is perhaps the most eerie. So Saturn is a source of intense radio emissions according to NASA. They monitored it with the Cassini spacecraft, and the radio waves it picked up were closely related to the auroras near the poles of Saturn, which are kind of similar to the northern and southern lights that we have on Earth. Take a listen. Sounds like something straight out of a horror film, doesn't it? Ugh, nightmare fuel. According to the researchers working with Cassini, I quote, "All of the structures we observe in Saturn's radio spectrum are giving us clues about what might be going on in the source of the radio emission above Saturn's auroras. We believe that the changing frequencies are related to tiny radio sources moving up and down along Saturn's magnetic fields." Now, at the time, scientists couldn't agree on a theory to explain the phenomenon, but noted how amazing it was that the radio emissions on Saturn sounded so similar to what was on Earth. Weird. Alright, there we have it, friends. Spooked out much? Space is so darn neat, but it's a little hard to not feel uneasy at times about what could really be out there. How How did you guys interpret those noises? And do you think that humanity will ever encounter life from elsewhere in the universe? And what do you think is on Jupiter?
Number 5. The training is brutal. When you were young, did you ever dream of being an astronaut? I think most of us did. You know, dreaming of being a cosmic sailor soaring through the Milky Way. I know I certainly did. I thought about how I'd ace the training. I'd be the perfect astronaut. I'd be this golden-haired hero of space, like a Luke Skywalker or a guy on an old pulp novel cover or something. Well, the movies and the media makes being an astronaut out to being a lot more glamorous and a lot easier than it is. I mean, we saw Homer Simpson do it and we figured we all could. But the truth is, they really do not take just about anybody. You already need to be a brilliant scientist and have an exceptional, spotless military career. So they're not just taking anybody, they are taking the best of the best of the best, the top 1% of the 1%. And they need people who can withstand incredible tolls on their body and are able to handle any problem that could be thrown their way in space. Turns out going to space, not that easy. These physical tasks include things like wilderness survival training, spending days surviving alone in the wilds, on the off chance that your ship crashes on re-entry in the middle of nowhere and you need to be able to fend for yourself before rescue comes. As well, training includes things like swimming laps in a 200-pound spacesuit or spending literally 24 hours in a row submerged underwater to stimulate the feeling of floating around in a giant suit. Or how about taking a trip on the infamous Vomit Comet, the plane that flies in parabolas to induce weightlessness and zero gravity to get your body used to floating around before you do it for real, and more often than not has astronauts tasting what they had for lunch one more time. That's about the most pleasant way I can think to say that. That doesn't quite sound like the fun, carefree adventure I dreamed of as a kid. And if you're looking for more scary stories, strange space stories, UFO sightings, we have got plenty of that and way more on Top 5 Scary. Plus, just about everything scary you could ever think of above the sun and below it. So tap that bell and stay subscribed and don't miss a single scream. Number 4, it destroys your body. Even if you are one of those best of the best of the best who can handle the brutal training that thins out the herd, once you actually do get up into space properly, just existing ravages your body in all sorts of fun, terrifying ways you've never thought of. When you think about it, we really are not meant to be up in that environment. It's kind of like a fish trying to survive on land. So it's not much of a surprise that our body kind of reacts violently poorly to the new conditions. Here's a terrible one I bet you didn't know about. I bet you didn't know that astronauts' gloves are so tight and sealed that when they take them off, I'm actually gonna gag, astronauts lose their fingernails. They get pulled like right off, and frequently they break and sprain their fingers just taking their gloves off. Or maybe you didn't know that most astronauts, after entering zero gravity for the first time, vomit almost immediately, even if they've had tons of training and simulator experience. And this is not made better at all because, where is that vomit going? It's just floating around you for everyone to see. Literally just being alive in space is bad for your body. You can just be sitting, vibing by the window, and it's gonna do damage to you. Astronauts who spend extended time in a space station report a huge loss of bone density, reporting horrible creaking and pains. They even shrink a little bit. Some astronauts note that when they got back to Earth, their spine had to straighten back out in an incredibly painful process. But when asked what the worst part of space life is, one astronaut, Tim Peake, responded saying, "It's watching the soles of your feet disintegrate." I am gonna do my level best to explain this next thing to you without vomiting, but I cannot promise anything. He described that because astronauts use their feet so rarely in space, their soles start to soften like a newborn baby's. And the feet gradually force off all the dead skin and calluses that you build up over a lifetime of walking. Meaning sometimes astronauts, when they remove their socks, shower the cabin with a lifetime of dead skin flakes and big chunks of foot floating around the space station like the literal most disgusting snow globe imaginable. Number 3, and your mental too. The thing is, it's not just your body that is going to be put through the absolute ringer when you find yourself with a career floating up in the stars. Your mental faculties need to be sharper than anyone, and able to deal with anything that could possibly get thrown at you as you're floating up miles away from home. It's no wonder David Bowie and Elton John wrote so many songs about how sad it is to be up in space. Astronauts report feeling a wide array of mental health struggles, reporting that the isolation causes them loneliness, depression, anxiety, stress, fatigue, mood swings, concentration issues, and some even getting full-blown PTSD upon returning back to the Earth. But, I mean, I get it. Imagine the workload. Imagine working a grueling day, not just any regular day, a day where if your work goes wrong, you could lead to one of or many of your teammates' deaths, and then having to go to sleep in a cold space station away from your loved ones and do that over and over again for 100 days straight. Imagine you have a bad day at work in space. You can't even go home about it. You gotta go home to space. Sleeping on a space station is far from a cozy night in a crib either. For one, there's constant noise all around you on a space station. Nobody can hear you scream in space, that much is true, but everybody can hear all the engines and computers and all that stuff going off inside the space station, meaning there's never a quiet moment. It's also not as dark as you might hope. Not only do you have to deal with the fact that your sleep cycle is no longer tied to the sunrise and sunset anymore, because you're going to see about 16 of those a day, but you have to tend with flashing lights all over the station from the machinery, but as well lights that are thought to be caused by cosmic rays passing through your eyelids. As well, there's also, no gravity. They definitely tell you that. Imagine having to tie yourself to a wall to avoid bumping your head around a cabin while you're just trying to get your 8 hours and a little REM time. Number 2, brown trout and recycling. Okay. This is going to be the grossest part of the list by far. If you want to skip right ahead to number 1, I get it. There's a reason I put this at number 2, and you'll all understand in a second. Just know I'm a child and I have the sense of humor of an 8-year-old. When you compare all the physical and mental danger astronauts have to face, is going to the toilet scarier than the risk of death? It honestly sounds like it. Peggy Whitson is an astronaut who holds a ton of records. Foremost, she's got the record for the most time spent in space, spending nearly 2 full years in orbit. She's spoken out and said that her least favorite part of living in space is the bathroom. Now, number 1 is considered to be a little easier, but it does not sound enjoyable in any way. A little hose, you attach it and it sucks the urine out, and then a machine converts that into drinking water because, yeah, astronauts drink a lot of their own pee. Now, admittedly, it's heavily processed, okay? You're not getting it out of the water cooler, it's not coming out yellow. But on a spaceship, water is sacred. Much like the still suits of Arrakis, all liquids and fluids are recycled. The water you wash your hands with, excrete, or spit out brushing your teeth, all of that is collected, processed, recycled to be drank again. Try not to think about that too much. Every astronaut you've ever seen on the news has drank so much pee. Astronauts have to fill a glorified porta potty pit and then put on a special rubber glove and pack it down nice and compact to be processed. But in zero gravity, things happen, and more often than any astronaut would ever care to admit, sometimes the mission goes a bit bad. Chris Hadfield said his crew would refer to these incidents as brown trouts. I'm not going to explain it. I think you understand. Leroy Chow, retired astronaut, spoke on his time on the station and said sternly that everyone cleans up their own mess when it happens, but he didn't elaborate on what that meant, but you can read through the lines pretty easy. When you were a little kid dreaming about life in space, did you ever consider that the world's best and brightest minds would be putting on the poop glove to catch brown trouts? And I am so sorry for the mental image I have given you. Number 1, danger. And above all else, if it hasn't been made exceedingly clear yet in this video, the life of an astronaut is not an easy one and oftentimes is extremely dangerous, with anything being able to go wrong spelling a certain disaster. Everything needs to be perfect. Now, you could look up countless stories of astronauts in danger, but I'm going to share one from Chris Hadfield because he's a Canadian icon. He spoke to BuzzFeed News about how on his first flight ever, he and fellow astronauts had to navigate a 250,000-pound space station towards a target the size of a coffee cup on the Russian Mir space station. Hadfield was there to relay the speed and range information to the pilot as they were pulling in for a docking maneuver, which had to be incredibly precise. In Hadfield's own words, if you hit the Mir too soft, the spring mechanisms bounce you off. If you hit the mirror just a little bit too hard, well, then you risk breaking the station in half and ending the lives of everybody on board. So you've got to hit it exactly right. No pressure or anything. When the shuttle crew was about 30 feet away, two sensors started telling them two different things. One of them said that they were at 32 feet away, and the other one said 20 feet away. Hadfield said, "They're either both wrong or one of them is completely wrong. Now what do? There's nobody to ask, and if the crew on board this shuttle doesn't solve this problem in the next 30 seconds, then this is it for everybody." Hadfield described using his thumb to try and measure the distance from the window. This told him they were about 21 feet away, and he used a stopwatch to try and do the math to figure out how fast they were going, and when they should fire thrusters. And well, since I mentioned, Chris Hadfield is a national hero and not a national tragedy, we know they did end up hitting the target at the correct speed, even with 3 seconds to spare. Hadfield said the shuttle crew didn't even say a word until a few minutes after, when the shock had finally worn off, and one of the members of the crew said, "Hey, we did it, we're actually here."
Number 5. The NASA Photoshop cover-up. The most recent of the incidents on this list is the accusation from prominent UFO hunter Scott C. Waring that NASA is editing archival photos to remove alien craft in an effort to hide the existence of extraterrestrials from the people of Earth. As evidence of this, he posted a photo from the 1968 Apollo 7 mission that he claims shows a UFO on his blog, saying that the craft he saw in 2013 had been edited out of the photo by 2015. As he himself put it, "Guys, I discovered this UFO back in 2013 and NASA used my website to edit it out by 2015. Now I have found them in the US National Archives. They have accidentally saved the original Apollo 7 photo with the UFO in it. The photo in question shows a black object seemingly floating below the Apollo 7 spacecraft and above the planet. The supposedly edited photo does not show the small black object." Waring expressed his concerns in the following quote, "This is 100% proof that NASA used my discoveries and used photo editing software to edit out the UFO and then add a lot of contrast to the original photo to cover up most of the detail. Then, to top it off, they no longer have the largest 5 megabyte size to download, but instead only have a tiny thumbnail of about 200 kilobytes in size. Its reduced size and quality has destroyed its usefulness. NASA has to be stopped. This kind of cover-up is very corrupt and deceitful to not only the American public, but the world." Despite these claims, the black mark can be seen in other official versions of the photo, and according to analog film experts, they say it is likely just an imperfection in the photo negative. As they put it, irregular shaped dull marks or roundish spots on the surface of your film are likely to be drying marks, caused by the droplets of water forming in the film's surface during the drying stage. These marks are typically seen on the film backing. Films washed in hard water areas are more likely to see this problem. Is NASA really altering photos in their archives in order to cover up alien life? Possibly. Is this an example of them doing so? I'm not entirely convinced. Number 4. The space fireflies. During the race to the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union, one of the landmark moments of the race was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission, when American astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth. As important as this moment was in the history of space exploration, it is better remembered by UFO enthusiasts for what Glenn saw out of his window during the mission. While Glenn was flying over Australia in the Friendship 7 capsule, he looked out the window and saw what he later described as fireflies. Upon seeing this, he radioed the following back to NASA Mission Control: "I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. They look like little stars." Glenn then tapped on the window, and the fireflies seemed to react and flew away. NASA was of course worried that this was parts of the capsule heat shield collapsing, but thankfully for Glenn, this was not the case. Because the mission wasn't being broadcast live, the firefly story didn't get much media attention, being somewhat of an urban legend. However, when the next American in space, Scott Carpenter, also reported seeing the luminescent particles, NASA had an excuse at the ready, saying that it was caused by ice particles from the condensation of the ship's heat exchanger. While to most this would sound like a plausible explanation, John Glenn maintained until the day he died that what he saw could not be explained by ice particles. What did John Glenn see out his capsule window during the 1962 Mercury Atlas mission? Was it really ice particles? Or is NASA trying to hide the truth from the people of Earth? Was John Glenn right? Is it a coincidence that multiple James Bond films were also directed by a man named John Glenn? We may never know. Number 3. Shuttle Atlantis' close encounter. In an age of internet and live broadcasts, it is getting harder and harder to prevent information from reaching the public, with it usually being only a matter of time before secrets find their way out of the shadows and into the light. Such is the case in our next entry, which happened in 2006 during the STS-115 mission of the Shuttle Atlantis to aid in the construction of the International Space Station. The shuttle and its crew had successfully completed its mission and had almost completed the trip back to Earth when Mission Commander Brent Jett looked out the window and noticed, as he put it, some kind of reflective structure. He radioed Mission Control and told them what he saw, telling them that what he was looking at, quote, didn't look like anything I've ever seen outside of this shuttle, that's for sure. NASA was worried that whatever the object was, it might be some crucial part of the craft that had broken off. They took control of the cameras that were broadcasting the mission to try and get a look at what Commander Jett had seen. To the shock of all the cameras, it saw 3 bright objects in the sky. The information was picked up by the media, and NASA scrambled to come up with a suitable explanation. They ordered an inspection of the craft to see if it was a broken off part of the ship as they had assumed, but could not find any evidence of damage. When the ship returned to Earth, another inspection was ordered, but once again, no damage other than a small micrometeor impact was found. NASA has never been able to explain what happened during this mission, and seem to have made no effort at all to solve the mystery in the years since. Or do they already know what happened, and simply do not want us to be in on the secret? As disturbing as that prospect may be, it would not surprise me to learn that it is the truth. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's alien adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and being the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission, and set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours in 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects, and the government's effort to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957, while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd, and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made any sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number, which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negative before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told that they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about this encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucer's pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. Did we even go to the moon? As we bring our video to a close, we must talk about one of the most popular NASA cover-up theories out there. While several people are convinced that NASA has come across evidence of alien life that they are keeping from us, or that they have even managed to make contact with extraterrestrials, there is still an inherent level of trust involved in those theories. The idea that NASA is covering up such evidence relies on the belief that NASA has really managed to send men to space. However, there are a significant number of people who don't even trust that this occurred, believing that man has never set foot on the moon. In the interest of fairness, let's explore this theory further. The gist of the theory is that while the United States and Russia were racing to see who could get to the moon first, the United States government built a set and filmed fake astronauts pretending to walk on the moon, broadcasting the footage across the world and effectively ending the space race in their favor. Some theories even say that famous director Stanley Kubrick was hired after the impressive special effects in his science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey caught the eye of the US government. He was apparently hired to direct the allegedly fake moon landing. The evidence that people have latched onto over the years include shadows in photos that don't line up how people think they should, claims that the astronauts could not survive the Earth's radiation field, the lack of stars in the moon landing photos, and the infamous American flag that they claim appears to be flapping in the wind despite the lack of wind on the moon. Most, if not all, of this evidence has been explained by NASA, but once someone is convinced that the moon landings are fake, no explanation from NASA is going to convince them. Whether the moon landing is real or not, it is a good example of how the public's trust in a government institution can erode to the point where some people feel like they can't even take the most basic bits of information provided by NASA for granted.
Number 5. Yang Liwei. In space, no one can hear you scream. They also can't hear you laugh, sing, or really just about do anything. It's markedly quiet up in space, which would make encountering a sound that you don't recognize while floating through the cosmos quite the stressful encounter, wouldn't you agree? In 2003, Yang Liwei became the first taikonaut to be sent into space by the CNSA, that's the Chinese National Space Administration, making headlines and history. Now, a few years ago, Liwei was giving an interview talking about his experiences, and he let slip a bizarre encounter that happened to him while he was out there in space. He said he recalled hearing the sound of someone knocking the hull of the spaceship as if someone was hammering at an iron bucket. He said, it didn't come from inside the spaceship, but it didn't come from outside either. That doesn't make me feel good. Naturally, Liwei was a little more than concerned at what he was experiencing, and he peered out into the porthole in hope of seeing something, maybe like low on fuel, and the spacecraft was just tumbling through space. Ed was asleep. We were taking turns sleeping in shifts. Anyway, Ed was asleep, and I was doing something in the craft. When I looked outside, I just glanced up, and there was something out there. It had a geometrical shape, similar to a beer can or a pop can, and with a little thing, like maybe a pencil or something sticking out of it. That size, dimensionally, it was all white. Now naturally, people ran with this and published stories about McDivitt having seen a UFO and this being proof of an alien craft or a drone up in space. I mean, an astronaut saying outright, "I think I saw a UFO up there," that's a pretty big deal. That's way more exciting than anything they were doing in the Gemini mission. McDivitt, however, changed his own tune about it and claims that when he returned home and he studied photographs from the craft, trying to understand what it was that he saw, he had a very boring revelation. McDivitt claims now that what he had seen was actually just a reflection of bolts from the hull in the window. The windows in the Gemini 4 craft were layered with 5 panes of glass, so that if one pane somehow cracked, there's still a good amount of pressure integrity. This thinking being that one of these panes did crack, and the sun shined on them just at the right angle, and the strange white object McDivitt saw was nothing more than a reflection being multiplied and reflected off multiple window panes. McDivitt clarified in the same interview, saying, "I'm quite sure that's what this thing was." Now, of course, it's also possible that he really did see a UFO and NASA got to him and pressed down on him just a little bit to get him to stop talking about it and publicly deny it. I mean, it's possible. I've definitely speculated way more wild, outrageous things than that on this channel. Number 3, Leroy Chiao. Leroy Chiao is an American astronaut and one of considerable renown. Chiao's flown 3 missions and he served as the commander on Expedition X, a 6.5-month-long voyage living on the International Space Station. Expedition X. That does kind of sound more like a raging house party than a NASA mission, but to each their own. In 2005, Chiao and another astronaut were outside installing navigation antennas on board the ISS, some 230 miles above the Earth, floating at 17,000 miles per hour, and Chiao saw something bizarre in the sky that he couldn't understand. Why don't we take a listen? "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line, and it was almost like an upside down check mark, kind of like an upside down Nike swoosh. And I saw them fly by, and I thought it was awfully strange." Chiao would tell the Huffington Post this. The cosmonaut with him didn't see the lights in time, facing the other way entirely. Imagine that, missing the aliens because you were looking the wrong way. Embarrassing. Some have speculated that the lights could have been the lights from a squid fishing boat from Earth, which use these incredibly bright lights when fishing at night for squid, and these have been reported erroneously as UFO sightings or bizarre phenomena in space all the time with these strange green lights. It pops up. There was something that happened similarly on the ISS on a live feed they were doing where these lights went by and people thought they were an alien craft, but really just a squid boat. So it's not entirely unreasonable to think this. Now, Chiao himself is skeptical of whether or not what he saw is alien in origin. Although, and I think this is important, he's open to the idea of it. He's open to this discussion. Listen to what he said. He said, "I'm skeptical of claims that we've been visited by aliens from another planet or another dimension, but I don't rule it out 100%. I have an open mind, and I do believe there's other life in the universe. But if there is life out there that's so much more advanced than we are, and they either know how to travel great distances in short amounts of time, or they're able to come from parallel universes into ours, well, why don't they just come and show themselves?" Well, maybe they did, Leroy. Maybe that was them extending an olive branch and trying to show themselves and they were just being a little bit shy, and you're just being skeptical. Yeah, well, you know, maybe we just have to make them feel really welcome. Arms open, say, "Come on in, guys. We're ready for you." Number 2, Story Musgrave. Story Musgrave. That's his real name. Story Musgrave. He's an interesting critter, bro. He was an astronaut. He's flown on 5 different space shuttles. He's got 6 different academic degrees, collecting them like they were the Infinity Stones. He's a public speaker, and now he's an Imagineer at Disney. Isn't that something? Making animatronics for Avatar World. He's got quite the career path. And he may also be the human that aliens have chosen to represent themselves to as their envoy. I get it though, look at the guy. He kind of looks like an alien, which might be why. So he does look wise. If I was an alien, I'd contact him, definitely. He's academic, he's driven. He worked for the most powerful organization on Earth, and he worked at NASA. Story claims that on 2 different missions, he encountered a being looking like a giant snake that was sentient and recognized him. Take a listen to this. "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I've seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's got waves in it and it follows you for a rather long period of time. You know, the more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certain je ne sais quoi that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, some just proteins coming together, and some just single-cell organisms. Well, single-cell organisms aside, what was that cell organism? Was it a floating hose that had come off the ship? Musgrave claiming that he'd seen the entity twice certainly raises an eyebrow, unless these ships are prone to breaking in the exact same hose. Well, he never said outright if he thought it was an alien or not. He did offer that he does believe there's intelligent life out there just waiting. Take a listen. Living creatures far more developed as civilizations. That's why I make an effort to communicate. And I might be considered eccentric because I do, but I know the probabilities are close to zero. But I do tell them to come down and get at me. And get at him you should, aliens. Story Musgrave is out there waiting for you. He's got stories to tell you and you can tell him some stories. Number 1. Gordon Cooper. Major Gordon Cooper is a flying ace in his own right before conquering the stars. He was the first man in space to ever spend a full 24 hours by himself, which was probably just so lovely. Imagine all that me time. And he was the last American to ever spend a solo orbit around the planet. A real go-getter, real loner cowboy type. He was also reached out by aliens more than once in his life. Seems like aliens really pick and choose their favorites. When he was still a flying ace in 1951, he says over a test flight in West Germany, he encountered 3 flying metallic saucers following his plane. Now, he reported this bizarre incident to his superiors, but as far as we know, it was never followed up or investigated further. And this was only a few years after Roswell and Kenneth Arnold, the civilian pilot, would both make headlines as stories of flying saucers, so maybe the government was just tired of hearing about flying saucers for a bit and was like, yes, Cooper, yes, you totally saw some flying saucers. This wouldn't be the last close encounter of the third kind for Major Cooper, however. In 1963, on the Project 9 Mercury mission, Gordon was orbiting the Earth and returning home when he noticed a glowing green orb following behind him, which he described as looking ethereal. Now, whatever this ethereal glowing green orb was tracked on radar stations all the way down home down under in Australia, so it was a physical, tangible object, not some trick of the light, no squid boat here. Now, all of this would be a pretty strange set of coincidences as is, but when Gordon touched down back to Earth, he was ready for a press conference to entertain journalists' questions. Only NBC had told their reporters they were forbidden from asking any questions about what Gordon had seen, whether or not he believed in UFOs, or any questions about flying saucers or that sort of ilk. Isn't that curious? Was NASA covering something up? Could that green orb have been some hyper-advanced space-age technology? An envoy from a more advanced civilization? How many things can I speculate are aliens? All of them. Cooper has said before in the USA, every day our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this, but no one wants to make them public. Why? Because authorities are afraid that people may think up God knows what kind of horrible invaders. We have to avoid panic. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this little quote here from Major Gordon Cooper, but it sounds like he knows something about NASA higher-ups that they press down on stories involving things from beyond because they think we can't handle it, or that we need to avoid panic, or because they're worried that people like me are gonna say that they're aliens. Number 5. They say in space, no one can hear you scream. But what about a knocking? China's first man in space, Yang Liwei, might be able to tell you what the sound of a man screaming in space sounds like. The taikonaut, the term for an astronaut from China's space program, first visited the stars on a maiden voyage in 2003. While up there, soaring the cosmos, Liwei reported hearing something knocking on the spaceship's hull. He said it didn't sound like it was coming from inside the ship, but it didn't sound like it was coming from the outside of it either. Now, normally, you're not really supposed to hear, anything in space, so this was out of the norm. Liwei went to peer out the porthole just to confirm that there were no goblins or gremlins hanging on the outside of the hull ripping up nuts and bolts, and says he didn't see anything of any note outside causing the sound, which he claims sounded like someone banging on an iron bucket with a hammer. Now, where it gets really interesting is that other taikonauts on the Shenzhou 6 and 7 spacecrafts in 2005 and 2008 both reported hearing the exact same phenomenon. One could be a coincidence, one can be explained off. But 3 separate occurrences of hearing something knocking on the ship's hull? Could it be something related to the shuttle's construction? Or is there something haunting the Shenzhou spacecrafts? Wait. Do you hear that? That knocking? It sounds like a transmission coming from inside the studio. Something, a voice telling me that you should subscribe to Top 5 Scary Videos for the best scary videos on the web. It's strange. I don't know what it means. Sorry, let's move on. Number 4. Now we know space is silent, I'd say no one can hear you scream, but I literally just used the alien joke on the last point, and I've hit my quota for 80s movies references already, and we're not even halfway through the list. I think the silence of the stars would drive me absolutely nutty. I don't know how I'd handle the quiet. I need something in my ears. In 1969, a triumvirate of 3 astronauts claimed they heard something pierce the silence. Apollo 10 astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young, while on the surface of the moon, were photographing craters, making memories, that sort of thing, when all 3 of them unanimously claimed they had heard something ethereal on their headsets, claiming that they had heard a sound that was strange, melodic, and composed and otherworldly. All of them described it as music. Now, it's worth noting that it was 1969, so there was no chance that someone accidentally had just left an Aphex Twin album inside the ship's CD player. Commander Cernan said at the time, "We're gonna have to find out about this because no one is going to believe us. Don't worry. Just like the Ghostbusters, we're ready to believe you." And look at that, I snuck in another 80s movie reference without you even noticing. So what exactly was the crew listening to? Could it have just been something malfunctioning on the ship? Feedback from some equipment somewhere? Or could it have been some extraterrestrial entity trying to contact them, or getting caught on the airwaves? Now, some speculate radio interference, but not everyone buys the official story, and NASA has never given an official answer. The biggest question remains, though, is what does space music sound like? If I had to guess, I'd say probably like Grimes' music. I think that's what moon men are listening to. Number 3. When you think of an alien, what do you picture? A little gray thing with big black eyes peering out at you from a flying saucer? Maybe a regular looking man with pointy ears and a strong brow? Maybe a noble warrior with a cool energy sword? Point is, you probably picture something a bit bipedal because of sci-fi depictions. But it doesn't have to be that way. What about a snake? Space snakes. Why does it have to be space snakes? Dr. Story Musgrave has 6 degrees as a physician, former astronaut, and consultant for the Imagineers at Disneyland. Dr. Story Musgrave sounds like a completely fake man who has one of the coolest names ever, but he is very real, and he has one of the most impressive resumes on the planet. He can also boast that he's been to space on 6 separate occasions and has seen things you wouldn't believe. In a 1994 interview, Musgrave spoke out about coming into contact with something he believes to be extraterrestrial. He said, "I've seen a snake out there, 6-7 feet long. It's rubbery and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of living things out there. And that sort of thing brings to you a certainty that other living creatures are out there." Now, skeptics have dismissed this, of course, saying Musgrave just saw a hose or a loose bit of debris or something, but Musgrave insists that the entity he saw had its own method of propulsion and was following him around directly. He said he saw this creature on 2 separate occasions. Maybe it remembered him. Obviously, Musgrave is considered to be fairly reputable as far as NASA astronauts go, and I mean, if Disney trusts him, he must be pretty reputable. So it seems unlikely that he would tell a tall tale. When asked directly what he thought he saw up there, Musgrave said, "Living creatures far more developed as civilizations. They've been around for 100 million years, and we can't even conceive how advanced they are and the kind of things they're doing. That's why I make an effort to communicate. And I might be considered eccentric because I do, but I do tell them to come and get me." And you know what? Thank you, Musgrave. I'm glad someone is willing to be the spokesperson for aliens. Maybe offer them a ticket to Space Mountain. They might feel right at home at that. Or they might be very offended, I'm not sure. Number 2. Many who go to space see bizarre things that they can't explain. And yet many space travelers don't speak out about what they see, for fear of reprimandation, of being deemed nothing more than a tinfoil hat wearing loon. Russian cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok said on the matter, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke on such things." Well, let's take a listen to his story. In 1981, while orbiting outside of the Salyut station, Major Kovalyonok was exercising when he saw something traveling outside the station alongside the porthole. He claims he saw something outside the porthole that was an object he could not explain. He said it was something floating that looked a bit like a barbell, except it was transparent, and it looked like it had something inside of it. He said he saw gas discharging out of it, like it was reacting. He insists that whatever he saw wasn't artificial, and that it moved in a way that suggested life. He said he saw it tightening and pulsating like an organ. He described the entity as being impossible within the laws of physics. As he was observing it, it combusted spontaneously in an incandescent ray of golden light. Seconds later, a golden explosion followed behind it, and 2 spheres of golden light appeared, which Kovyunyuk described as beautiful. After the explosions, there was a white smoke and a cloud-like sphere, and as the station orbited around Earth's shadow, the spheres never returned. Unlike a lot of his peers, Kovyunyuk was very willing to speak out on his experience about what he saw. There was a small investigation into the possibility that it could have been a missile test or a weapons test of some kind, but no conclusive answers were ever found. Whatever he saw, we may never get the truth. And to my Russian viewers, I am so sorry for that pronunciation. Number 1. Major Gordon Cooper is an American astronaut of some renown. The first astronaut to spend a full 24 hours in space, and the last American to spend a fully solo orbital mission. A renowned, reputable astronaut, he's very insistent about life beyond the stars. Near the end of a 22-hour trip around the planet in 1963, he claims that while ending orbit and returning home, he saw a glowing green ethereal orb following him approaching his capsule. The entity was even picked up by a tracking radar in Australia. And yet bizarrely, when he landed, reporters from NBC told him that they were barred from questioning him about the sighting and experience at all. This wouldn't even be Cooper's first experience with UFOs. In 1951, while on an Air Force mission flying over Western Germany, Cooper claimed to have seen metallic saucers flying in ways that would outmaneuver any American spacecraft. He said, "I believe these extraterrestrials and their crews are visiting this planet. Most astronauts are reluctant to discuss UFOs." Listen to this other quote from Cooper. "In the USA, every day our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this. But nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. We have to avoid panic by all means." Now, it sounds like Cooper is alluding to a cover-up. Gordon Cooper isn't just some nut on the street barking out to whoever will listen, but a respected, experienced sailor of the stars. So is this why most stories of UFOs get buried? And astronauts who speak out about it are all labeled as sensationalists? All because NASA thinks that people can't handle it? I think we're ready. I think the stories are starting to come out there. The truth is out there. And we will find it.
Number 5. Space Camp. Starting this list off, we arrive at the Apollo 8 mission. Well, 7 other missions before it, but it was a little rocky back then, you know? The early days. But Apollo 8 was the first fully crewed spacecraft to leave low Earth orbit and the first human spaceflight to reach the moon. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, aka the crew, orbited the moon 10 times without landing. December 21st, 1968. The Apollo 8 astronauts returned to Earth on December 27th, 1968. Now, here's the scary part. Apparently, while they were up there, they claimed to have seen some pretty strange stuff. Some weird lights, glowing moving balls, and apparently bonfires all over the moon. What? Yeah, apparently the men said it looked like smoke and small bonfires when visiting the far side of the moon. When the capsule passed behind the moon for 45 minutes, the crew claimed to have seen multiple lights coming from the surface. And thankfully, NASA even transcribed what they heard. Borman says, bonfires. Anders says campfires. All in all, we have astronauts puzzled at what they're seeing. 7 months later, Apollo 11 is performing a mission orbiting the moon and captures apparently a bunch of things that are out of the ordinary. Buzz and Collins both claim to have seen things like lava flowing, aliens parked on craters, to even small bonfires and flickers on the surface. Of course, there's no oxygen on the moon, so what could have caused the fire and the smoke? Number 4, air buds. As always, dudes, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, hit that thumbs up button or leave a comment down below. It really helps us out. What's the biggest NASA secret you know of? Let me know down below. I'll check it out. When we think about astronauts that have spent their fair share up in space, we can't forget the experiments in the early stages of both the Soviets and the American space programs. It truly was a race, pushing the limits faster and faster, bigger and bolder kind of stuff, and with that omelet comes a couple broken eggs. We often forget that NASA has sent its fair share of animals up there as well, and of course, unfortunately, not many of them have returned back to us. Yeah, very sad. Science is one of those things where its benefits are tremendous, but the hypothesis parts sometimes are a little dark and grim. We remember Laika, the space dog, and her 103-minute cosmic journey aboard Sputnik 2, but let's not forget the infamous Able and Baker. This was the American version of Laika, only a year later too. 1959, the United States launched one female rhesus monkey named Able and one female squirrel monkey named Baker into space. This mission lasted only 15 minutes and they both safely returned back home. Their predecessors, others, not so lucky. See, a couple of animals have yet to return from their space mission. Mice, geckos, dogs. It was a different time. To announce their successful flight, NASA unveiled Abel and Baker to journalists in the same room where just a month prior they had introduced the Mercury 7 crew as the country's first human astronauts. Big jumps, right? Sadly, after the training and missions, both animals passed. But you can visit them at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum where they're both on display. A little dark and grim, but we pay homage. Number 3. Valkyrie. NASA has been experimenting with a little bit more tech in the last 20 years. A little bit more robotics instead of fitting humans into a capsule. Seems like this next project has been in the works for some years, but under silent lock and key until recent years. Valkyrie is the name of the NASA's new semi-secretive AI project. Taken from Norse mythology, Valkyrie is designed to be a robust, rugged, and entirely electric humanoid robot capable of operating in degraded or damaged human-engineered environments. The NASA R5, aka Valkyrie, is the size of a full human adult with a 7-digit price tag, putting it a little bit more expensive than the very terrestrial Tesla bot. This robot was originally built for the 2013 DARPA Robotics Challenge. The 6-foot, 300-pound piece of machinery represents the future of space exploration. It's the first step towards a goal of human colonization on Mars and other planets in our solar system. Dude, this is nuts! High hopes for the robot, however currently tethered to the ceiling of a warehouse in Lowell, Massachusetts. Oh. The Lowell model is one of 4 units produced by NASA. The space agency held on to 1 robot for its own purposes and awarded 2 to the research of Northwestern and MIT, while the 4th lives in Scotland's University of Edinburgh. The 4 models are being tinkered and tailored on as we speak. Long story short, we've reached a peak in space travel where maybe living things don't have to make it or break it anymore. To reduce hazards and prevent any more life being lost or altered for science, the Valkyrie is an option for NASA to search very hazardous environments while keeping a pretty safe distance while doing so. Number 2. Ice cold. We all know about Jupiter's moon Europa. I was like 18 when I found out about all the planets' moons in our solar system. Yeah. Did you know that Jupiter has 79 moons? Like 79. Yeah, we have 1. Like, we know nothing, Jon Snow. Well, maybe we know something, because apparently we found traces of water on a couple different rocks now. Europa, the 6th largest moon in our solar system. It was discovered in 1610, and ever since then, we've kind of wondered what's on it. In 1979, the 2 Voyager spacecrafts passed through the Jovian system, providing the first hints that Europa may contain liquid water. The ground-based telescopes on Earth, along with the Galileo spacecraft and telescopes, have increased scientists' confidence for a European ocean. Yeah, cue NASA's Sesame program. Scientific exploration subsurface access mechanism for Europa. Sesame will not drill, however, but actually thaw its way under the icy ocean, and from there will operate small probes to conduct an array of research on biology, sediment, gases, and of course what we're all hoping for, humanoid mermaid-looking aliens. However, the part that really has NASA's attention is all of the tectonic activity beneath said icy shelf, meaning that somewhere in the middle, there's warm water flowing under with currents. Yeah, creepy. In 2011, NASA awarded Stone Aerospace $4 million to fund Phase 2 of Project Sesame. Phase 2 of the project consisted of testing the cryobot in Alaska in 2015. Phase 3 of the project will use a swarm of tiny robots the size of cell phones to whisk through the water beneath the thick icy shelf of Jupiter's moon looking for evidence of alien life. The tiny robots would be released underwater, swimming far from their mothership to explore a new world. Basically, the cryobot melts its way through the subglacial lake, collects samples, resurfaces, and comes back home. Yeah, seems like an alien movie plot just ready for scripting, huh? And number 1, Artemis 1. So we haven't been back to the moon since 1972, but why? Well folks, we're going back. And soon, like 2 weeks soon. Yeah, I didn't know either, as I'm a millennial who doesn't watch the news on TV. We're going back to the moon, people, but not the Apollo program anymore. No, we've changed the name to another Greek name. They're twin, Artemis. Apparently, Artemis 1 will be the first in a series of increasingly complex missions to build a long-term human presence on the moon for decades to come. Oh yeah, we're staying, like building forts and stuff. The primary goals for Artemis 1 are to demonstrate Orion's systems in a spaceflight environment and to ensure a safe re-entry, descent, splashdown, and recovery. Basically like the full shebang. Yeah, not taking any more risks, huh NASA? Safety first kind of deal, I like it. Not a long mission too. September 27th they're supposed to launch, and splash back down here in November, like 38 days long. Nice little quick one. And then reevaluate and select the people. Yeah, dude, this is sick. I'm down with phase 2 space stuff, you know? Like, let's get that robot up there. Number 5, ISS UAP. In 2019, 35-year-old Russian astronaut Ivan Wagner was working aboard the ISS as a first-time crew member, where he and fellow Russian Anatoly Ivanishin are working with Chris Cassidy, the American commander of the expedition. NASA didn't mention Wagner's video in a blog update about the mission and hasn't since, which makes this case a little fishy. Wagner was orbiting the Earth aboard the ISS and might have actually captured footage of potential UFOs, or better known now as UAPs, while recording a video of the aurora lights behind the Earth's beautiful curves. He labeled the video "Space Guests" or "How I Filmed the New Time Lapse." Very cryptic. I mean, he is Russian. Wagner wrote in a tweet featuring the video, which shows the aurora australis passing near Antarctica and Australia. He also tweeted, quote, "However, in the video you will see something else, not only the aurora. The footage shows the curved edge of the Earth at night, with the green swirl of the auroras moving across its surface and several star pinpoints visible in the background." He added that the video was shot in a time lapse, so the brief flash of the lights actually lasted for about 52 seconds straight in real time. Yo, I'm the alien guy, so I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, that's a craft. Like, of course it is. NASA didn't follow up? Like, what are they gonna say? Yeah, that's swamp gas, birds, balloons. Cut the feed! Cut the feed! Like, this is nuts. I get how Starlink and satellites are very organized and look like this, but like, come on. Shot from way up there. Wagner did not claim to see the phenomenon as it happened, of course. Good choice. And no one else aboard the ISS has acknowledged it. Also, good choice. Yeah, I bet they haven't. Like, why would you? You know? He also didn't indicate exactly when the footage was captured, just posted 6:24 a.m. August 19th, 2020. Number 4, the original tapes. Also, dudes, if you like what we do here, just keep creeping you out, you know, Hulk smash that like button. It always helps the channel out, and of course, let me know down below in the comments section what other UAP videos you got for me. You know I love that smoke. Send her over my way. I got some good ones coming up from my vault. What do you think? Are we alone out there, or what? You know my opinion. Especially since I found out the footage our parents and also 650 million people across the globe watched in 1969 was maybe not the original footage. Huh? Yeah, apparently what everyone saw in every television set across the globe wasn't as 4K as it was on NASA's end. A man by the name of Gary George has come across some very, very old tapes that might have been proof of what NASA was seeing. What we saw were a little bit different. Gary George, internship NASA engineer team, he bought surplus government tapes for $218, discovered originally 3 recordings, labeled Apollo 11 EVA, auctioned at Sotheby's, first generation on the moonwalk. It's even cleaner than what's been seen before. It's like a live HD stream to NASA. Okay, so hold on. NASA had a clearer copy this whole time? Like, I get it, maybe they had a bigger budget, you know, but why did it take so long for these clear tapes to come out? Like, it's 2019. That's a long time after just accidentally stumble across clear moon landing tapes, no? Like, why was NASA content on only letting us see these grainy, old recorded from a static TV videos when they had these HD B-reels of the moon? I'm thinking so that we can't see what's in the background or what's flying around at them. I don't see a lot of stars in that video. I wonder how long it'll take before Robert Bigelow or Tom DeLonge to get their hands on them, huh? Unfiltered, clean moon tapes. That's gonna cost you. I wonder what else is stuffed in an old box in NASA's basement. I guess we'll find out. Number 3, lost in space. During the 60s, the space race was on between the Americans and the Russians. A race to be the first to figure out what it is to put something or someone up above the clouds in a little metal box to just go and explore planets. Yeah. Although today we tend to look back at the space race with the Soviet Union as a competition we were destined to win, it was actually the Soviets that secured many of the early victories. American officials at the time weren't only worried about Soviet prestige winning out, they had very real concerns about Soviet space dominating and providing them an ultimate high ground in the next global conflict. While NASA's efforts were widely publicized, but sometimes the Soviets made it a point to never really announce a space mission until days after it was completed. Apparently this allowed them to maintain control over information, sharing oddly only the missions that went well, and maybe not all those failed tests also. The Giudica Cordiglia brothers from Italy were former amateur radio operators who apparently caught some homemade home audio recordings which allegedly proves the Soviet space race covered up some cosmonauts' deaths in the 1960s during trial and error. Yeah. Yeah, that's horrifying. Apparently she's saying, help, help, I feel hot. Where? Yes, I can. On the left, I see fire. Am I going to crash? Yo, that's horrifying and also really sad. I mean, NASA and the Soviets both launched animals into space that, sorry to say, spoiler alert, never really came home. Dogs, monkeys, lots of weird stuff happened in the early days of NASA. NASA also hasn't issued a statement since the audio recordings have made waves on the internet, but if the two brothers with an antenna and headphones in a basement can pick that up, what's NASA heard and recorded, huh? Number 2, The Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah, not just an absolute banger of an album by Pink Floyd, but also the most terrifying and mysterious places in our galaxy. The Dark Side of the Moon. NASA apparently does hear some pretty weird stuff in its time. Since its erection in the late 50s, the engineers, computer whizzes, and astronauts have all seen and heard some pretty weird stuff. Yeah, they sign non-disclosures, people. They can't really talk about anything. Buzz Aldrin is the only one who kind of dances on the line of non-disclosure and who gives a shit. You know what I mean? But he's old. So what exactly did the Apollo 10 astronauts hear when they were on the far side of the moon that NASA can't talk about and still can't? I mean, 1969 was a great time for tunes, right? Just hopefully not alien tunes. Despite what you may have heard, it's true that the Apollo 10 astronauts heard strange sounds behind the moon. They described it as outer space type music. But that's a very simple non-alien explanation for what crew members were hearing, and it's been public knowledge since the 70s. In the audio recordings from the Apollo 10 mission, astronaut Gene Cernan, who was piloting the lunar module, asks John Young, who was piloting the command module, if he hears that whistling sound. Cernan calls it music and says it even sounds outer spacey. Finally, Young says, "We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us."
Whistling sound? Yeah.
Woo!
Look at your... Yeah, it sounds like, outer space type music.
Yeah, that's absolutely terrifying. Apparently we were on the other side of the moon for like a whole hour without command being able to hear or communicate to respond. That's terrifying. You wonder why we never hear anything about the other side of the moon, huh? I wonder what's back there. And number 1, Bullseye. NASA's Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART, spacecraft has just beamed back the first image of its targets. The mini-moon Dimorphos, as well as its rock formation Titanus body it orbits, the asteroid Didymos. Yeah, I kinda knew about this way back when they kept it low, like really low. Kinda just happened out of nowhere. DART is a planetary defense test mission designed to impact the moonlet to alter its trajectory around Didymos, basically to catch you all up to speed here. If you've seen Armageddon, it's kinda where we're getting with this. The DART mission was launched at 10:20 p.m. on November 23rd, 2021, back during the pandemic. I watched this thing go up without any NASA pre-mission statement and I thought, that can't be good. SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from the Space Launch Complex 4 at the Vandenberg Space Force Base in California, that's a mouthful, launched this puppy up into space to kind of give the moon a little nudge. Yeah. The spacecraft is scheduled to arrive at its target in late September 2022, and according to NASA officials, which as of yesterday are right on schedule. The spacecraft has now captured the first images of its double target asteroid anomaly, which includes the moonlet it will crash into called Dimorphos, spinning around the asteroid called Didymos. Once it's slammed into Dimorphos, NASA will make observations of the asteroid from Earth to discern whether the spacecraft was able to alter the asteroid's trajectory or not. Yeah, basically, if it does, that means the method can be used to avert potentially hazardous asteroids on a collision course with Earth. If it doesn't, well, we gotta call our alien buddies for a ride, you know? If proven effective, this spacecraft design could potentially be scaled up to deflect an Earth-bound asteroid. The spacecraft is still 20 million miles away from the asteroids at the point of this picture, so they appear a little indistinguishable. Looks like a little star. NASA will live stream the impact event later this month, apparently. Hopefully with some 4K live NASA, not this grainy film stuff we're used to seeing. The space agency announced live coverage of the DART impact would begin at 6 p.m. on September 26th. It will air live on NASA TV. Hey, I've seen Armageddon. I know what's up. I'm sorry, AJ. You go take care of my little girl. Gets me every time. It's a great movie, great movie.
Number 5 on this list is the Fermi Paradox. This one is all about aliens, but maybe not how you might expect. Science Focus says, in 1950, Enrico Fermi, the man who built the first nuclear reactor, was having lunch in the canteen of the Los Alamos bomb lab in New Mexico when he suddenly said, where is everybody? Everyone around the table knew exactly what he meant. Decades later, Fermi's question was examined independently by the American physicists Michael Hart and Frank Tipler. Hart considered aliens spreading throughout our Milky Way, and Tipler considered self-replicating machines that, on arrival at a planetary system, exploit the resources to build 2 copies of themselves that continue voyaging. Both concluded that even at modest speeds of travel, every star in the galaxy would be visited in a fraction of the age of the Milky Way. As Fermi realized, the aliens should be here on Earth. They do not appear to be, though. This became the Fermi paradox. Hundreds of explanations have been proposed. They include the ideas that we are the first intelligence to arise in the galaxy and so are totally alone, and that we are a nursery world off limits to advanced civilizations that might adversely affect our development. A more mundane possibility is that there is no paradox because any signs of visitation in the distant past would be erased by wind, rain, and geological processes. Recently, however, a team led by Dr. Jonathan Carroll Nellenbach of the University of Rochester, New York, has proposed that our sun may simply have been bypassed by a wave of extraterrestrial expansion. So why are aliens not here? Have they already been here and we didn't even know? Or did they just bypass our solar system altogether? Or is all of this nonsense and the universe is just so big that they haven't gotten to us yet? It's certainly something interesting to think about. Considering the universe is infinite and there are so many places and planets we don't know about, it seems ridiculous to think that we're the only intelligent life or the first intelligent life in everything. Like, that's as if we hit the biggest lottery ever. Comment down below what you think about this alien question and why aren't they here yet? Number 4 on this list is dark matter. You've definitely heard the term dark matter get thrown around a bunch before, and you've probably wondered, what the heck is it? Well, if that sounds like you, then you aren't alone. Scientists all across the globe are still wondering what dark matter is and the purpose that it serves. Science Focus says dark matter gives out no light or too little light for us to detect. We know it exists because we see the effect of its gravity on the visible stars and galaxies. For instance, the Milky Way could not have dragged in enough matter to make its stars in the 13.82 billion years since the Big Bang without there being a lot of invisible matter whose extra gravity speeded things up. The European Space Agency's Planck satellite found that dark matter accounts for 26.8% of the mass energy of the universe compared with the 4.3% of normal atomic energy. It therefore outweighs the visible stars and galaxies by a factor of 6. Puzzlingly, no Earth-based experiment has found any evidence of dark matter despite decades of searching. It is conceivable that it's not our theory of matter that needs modification, but our theory of gravity. Or that dark matter is not a fluid made of a single particle, but is complex like the atomic matter we see around us. Maybe the universe is filled with dark stars and dark planets and dark life. There is an entire universe of dark matter that we don't even know about. Like, what the heck is this stuff and what's it composed of? Why can't our eyes see it? Why doesn't something this dense even show up? It's all very confusing and nobody can figure it out right now. Dark matter is one of the biggest mysteries in the universe, and understanding what it is and how it works could completely change our understanding of gravity and matter as a whole. Hopefully NASA can get a grasp on it soon and the mystery can finally be solved. Number 3 on this list is the central black hole. At the center of almost every single known galaxy in the universe, which there are about 2 trillion of, there is a huge black hole just chilling in the middle. These aren't your everyday typical black holes though, they are gargantuan in size and weight. Some of these beasts weigh around 50 billion times that of our sun. Just an absolutely insane number that our brains truly can't really comprehend. But how did this absolute unit of a black hole get there, and why is it so big? Well, NASA doesn't really know, and they are desperately trying to find out. Black holes are one of the most interesting things in our universe, and one of the things that we know very little about. The question of where does a black hole actually go to will probably never be answered because we'll never be able to go inside without getting completely crushed into oblivion. but figuring out why they're in the middle of pretty much every notable galaxy is important. If we can understand this, then we can understand how a galaxy is formed and potentially the lifespan of certain galaxies. Also, knowing what creates these black holes will help us better understand them and see if our planet will ever be at risk of such a disaster. Granted, maybe ignorance is bliss in this case, because even if we knew a black hole was coming, there's really nothing that we'd be able to do about it. Number 2 on this list is dark energy. For a long time, the only force that was thought to be operating on the entire universe was gravity. This was everywhere in the universe and decided pretty much how things played out. Gravity is not alone anymore though, or at least since the discovery of dark energy. Dark energy is this invisible force that is everywhere in the universe and is partially responsible for speeding up the expansion of said universe. Apparently this energy overtook gravity 5 billion years ago as the dominant force that's expanding the universe, and that's why it's happening in the first place. The thing is, we have no idea what this dark energy is or why it's here. Similar to dark matter, it feels like this has just appeared, and because we can't see it or have no idea of its origin, we have no idea how much weight it really has on us and our current laws of physics. Apparently 2/3 of the energy mass of the universe is made up of this stuff, and we have no idea about it. That's kind of scary if you think about it, and it puts in perspective how little we know about things. Oftentimes, I think we fall into a trap assuming that our species is far more advanced than it actually is, but when you consider that we have no idea where 2/3 of the energy mass in our universe came from, or what it is, it really brings you back to reality. I feel like this might be one of the hardest mysteries on this list to solve, and it's gonna take a while. And number 1 on this list is the multiverse. What seems to be the staple of a plotline of any good sci-fi movie these days is the multiverse, something that we truly know nothing about. The theory is basically that there is an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of possibilities and outcomes, and it's all just freaking infinite and honestly kind of hurts my brain to think about for very long. But is there any substance to this theory? How will we be able to know if it's true or not, and what would that mean for us? So the multiverse theory all comes from another theory called inflation theory. Inflation theory is the thinking that in basically a second, when our universe was just a baby, everything started inflating and growing super fast, expanding outwards in all directions. Now it's thought that the inflation of our universe stopped 14 billion years ago, but that when our universe stopped, the beginning of another started, and so on and so forth. It's very complicated, and in all honesty, I don't really understand all of it, but that's the bare bones. There's also the thinking that because life is so hard to support, as in you need so many things to go right in the universe, it seems extremely unlikely that if there is only one universe, life would have actually formed. If there were multiple or infinite universes, there would be enough chances though that one or more are bound to have the necessary things to create life. Either way, if this is true, then it obviously changes a lot of things about how we view our universe and the role we play in it. Maybe there's another version of you just chilling in a totally alternate universe right now, except instead of hands you have wings or something. A little ridiculous, I know, but if universes are infinite, then you never know.
Coming in at number 5, Challenger cover-up. Now this is a pretty big secret. Right now it's only being speculated, but there's actually quite a bit of proof to back it up. So as we know, back in 1986, one of the worst space shuttle disasters occurred. And that was the Challenger craft, which exploded in mid-flight. When this happened, NASA explained to everyone that the crew was thankfully unconscious at the time of the explosion due to cabin pressure. So they were not in any pain or fear when this disaster took place. However, shortly after this statement was made, it was revealed that the crew members on the space shuttle might have been awake after all, and it was actually likely that they knew they were going to die. It's assumed that NASA was trying to hide the truth, as this obviously wasn't a good look for them. They didn't want to make this already horrible tragedy even worse. The Rogers Commission actually revealed that NASA had not taken the correct precautions against catastrophic failure. It was also said that NASA had considered delaying the launch after engineers working on the space shuttle suggested they they do so, but they decided to go ahead with it in the end. And yeah, we all saw that that didn't work out for them. And at number 4, Hubble telescope hoax. As we know, every picture and story about space has always came from NASA. And all this time we've just believed whatever they said, because why question it, right? But on April 24th of 1990, the Hubble Space Telescope was said to be launched. But people are now saying that this telescope can't be real. People are saying that it's impossible for them to achieve the results they boast about achieving because of the basic issue of trying to photograph and record planets, stars, and galaxies using this extremely sensitive recording equipment. It was said this telescope could make its way around the Earth's orbit at 17,000 miles per hour. Also, there's an atmospheric refraction issue along with a 2,500 mile error factor to consider. The temperatures reach over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit in an altitude and orbit of 354 miles. There aren't any man-made machines that can operate at such temperatures. So yeah, people aren't believing this one. At number 3, secret shuttle. Apparently a secret space shuttle from the Air Force had been in orbit for 2 years before it returned to Earth in 2017. But no one has any idea what it was for or what it was doing up there all that time. The X-37B has performed missions since 2010, after being developed in 1998 and passed on to DARPA. After this landing, the commander of the Air Force Space Wing said, "Our team has been preparing for this event for several years, and I am extremely proud to see our hard work and dedication accumulate in today's safe and successful landing of the X-37B." This news about the military having a space shuttle quietly orbiting the Earth for over 700 days came as a surprise to a lot of people, and still to this day, the true reason for it being up there hasn't been revealed to the public. Coming in at number 2, UFO live streaming. There has been a lot of talk about NASA knowing about UFOs and aliens for some time now. It's even been said that NASA has streamed UFOs thanks to the webcam on the International Space Station. In several instances, UFOs have been said to have gone past the camera, and each time NASA cut the feed. UFologists, yes, that's an actual thing, have said that this is clear evidence that aliens do exist and that NASA's covering it up. There have also been astronauts who have claimed to see aliens. And there are people who used to work for NASA and they were compiling all this research and evidence and they were going to come forward with it, but they would end up going missing or found dead. I definitely think aliens do exist. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. And at number 1, staged missions. So this probably isn't the first you're hearing of this. Many people believe that NASA staged the first moon landing with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Many people have been very vocal in their beliefs that this just was an elaborate hoax that was filmed on a soundstage in Hollywood. One of the main pieces of evidence is the fact that in the pictures there are no stars in the sky. NASA said the reason for this was that the camera settings weren't adjusted to capture them. So yeah, people weren't buying that. Then there was the questioning of how was it possible that the flag was flapping in the footage up on the moon when there was no wind. Another question was how could the light from the sun cast unparalleled shadows? Finally, there were claims that a person from Mission Control, who has remained anonymous to this day, spoke to the astronauts in one of the first few moon landings and told them how to fake the footage. And of course, NASA denied all of these false claims. Many groups and individuals believe that NASA knowingly misled the public into believing the landings happened. It's believed NASA tampered with or destroyed evidence including photos, tapes, radio, and TV transmissions, moon rock samples, and even killing some eyewitnesses. This is one conspiracy theory I kind of agree with. What do you guys think?